I like to show NASDAQ over the last 40 years to make a point or two. Again, this is about when I got in the venture business. The numbers, because of the scale, don't show down here, but in 1975, the NASDAQ traded at 50. It's hard to imagine what growth in a market does when your index goes from 50 to 5,000. By the time we got close to 5,000, every venture capitalist I knew was so arrogant. Hopefully we aren't all arrogant anymore, but they were so arrogant, they were convinced they were geniuses. It was easy. Look, when you're working in a marketplace that goes from 50 to 5,000, it goes up 100-fold. If you just make a random investment in the market, if you put out $1 million, you're going to get back 100 million 25 years later. We weren't geniuses. We had a bull market carrying us forward. It was pretty easy. It didn't seem easy all the time. You know, some of those blips were kind of painful. But we were riding a terrific bull market. Our economy was, the venture capital industry was, the IT world was, software was. It was a great time. Well, look what's happened in the last 10 years. You've seen it. I've seen it. As you try to raise money for your companies. It's been a tough decade. From 5,000, we fell down to about 1,200. If you had most of your money invested in NASDAQ stocks, you lost 75% of your net worth. Hopefully you weren't leveraged, or you lost more than 100% of it. I was a lot poorer here than I was here. Thank goodness I was still eating, but because I wasn't leveraged, but some people made some really bad mistakes. It looked like we were on the way back, and we've bounced down again. And today, 10 years later, the NASDAQ is still half of what it was 10 years ago. I mention this to put things into perspective when you talk to a venture capitalist. We have to raise our money from institutional investors. You know who our limited partners are? People like Case Western Reserve. Thank you, sir. University endowments are major investors in venture capital and private equity firms. Public employee retirement systems are major investors. People like Ohio school employees and Ohio State teachers and CalPERS and CalSTRS and the insurance companies and the foundations. They're the ones that put up that $20 billion a year into venture firms like ours in the hopes that they'll get at least $40 billion back in 5 years. Double your money in 5 years, it's about a 15% compound rate of return. That's kind of what they'd like to see as a minimum from a venture capital firm, because you think if you put it in public stocks, you'll get maybe average of 8 to 10%. So what's happened? For the last 10 years, I mean, we're good, but we aren't smart enough to beat the market. When our market is declining, when the thing that values our product, the young growth companies, is falling, you know, we don't look so good. And in fact, the institutions that have invested in venture capital firms over the last 10 years have lost money. So we've gotten more cautious. We're not making those great big crazy investments that we made 10 years ago. It's harder for us to raise money, and it's harder for people to raise money from us. And that's just a fact of life. I wish it weren't that way. I'm not sure it's good for society. I know that peak then wasn't good. I know some of the valleys aren't good, and hopefully where we are now is not too far from where we ought to be. But it's not easy out there, I know that. And so to talk about kind of where we see opportunities and what we're doing that's exciting, I prepared this chart. I got to talk about it through Morgenthaler just because it's easier for me to talk that way, because these are the companies I know. But these are our last 5 funds. Fund 9 was raised in 2008, 2005, 2001, 2000, 1998. So this is kind of 12, 13 years of venture capital activity by a average size venture capital firm. We're certainly not the largest. This last one we raised was $400 million. It'll probably get invested in about 40 companies, about half life science and half IT. So as you can see, we're not even halfway through our IT portfolio yet. But some things kind of stand out as you look at this. There's sort of a trend from left to right. And that's really what's going on in the venture industry. In 1998 and 2000, we could finance some semiconductor companies. Peregrine is a company that I'm very excited about. It's a semiconductor company that I think is going to change the world of high-performance RF. For those of you who are technologists, they're actually doing silicon on sapphire, which has been a technology that's been around universities for decades, but they've gotten to the technology to the point where they can take a sapphire chip and put it in a CMOS fab and just do CMOS on it. And that changes the world. And so today, something like 100 million of the 400 million smartphones shipped have Peregrine switches in the front of them. They just got a request from a customer for a 16-throw switch. Gives you a flavor for how many different languages, how many different frequencies, radios have to exist in these smartphones now. It's absolutely incredible. And by the way, they want to buy those things for $50, that switch. It's amazing. But we're making money, and I think pretty good chance we're going to go public. But what's the only thing wrong with that is that company has consumed $200 million. You asked earlier how long we're in companies. This is a company we financed 10 years ago. It's finally profitable, and we finally have a market, I think, where we can take it public. The first venture money that went into this was not our money. It was from another firm that went in 1995. That company's been around for 15 years. So, you know, venture capitalists have sometimes we have maybe too fast a trigger finger, but sometimes we stick around and produce some good companies. Paratech's still doing well. Peregrine, Paratech's doing some interesting work in cell phones. Nextag was a major early success of ours in the comparison shopping site area. But we aren't going to finance any more Peregrines today. I financed one semiconductor company in this fund, which is doing DC to DC power conversion, again, for cell phones. Try to get rid of those little inductors in there. They're not so little when you add them all up and look at all the power they consume, and do the power conversion with high-speed digital logic instead, which is pretty cool stuff if you can do it. But that's one semiconductor company in our current fund. And we and most other venture capital firms today are focused over here. Consumer-facing internet services. Evernote, some of you may know of that as a note-taking app that's used pretty widely, at least on the West Coast. I don't know if it's being used around Case Western Reserve, but it's used extensively. That's a very exciting company we're in. Lending Club, you know, what you might expect. It's peer-to-peer lending over the web. Practice Fusion. Doctors' offices need, in fact, they're required to have online electronic medical records. A lot of companies are ready to sell them that product. We finance the company that will give it to them. Doctors like free. I was the son of a dentist. Doctors like free. They don't like to spend money. How can you do that? Well, the way you do anything else on the web, if you can be advertising supported, if the pharmaceutical companies are willing to support it, you can put a free EMR system in doctors' offices, and Practice Fusion is going great guns. We're also doing some software work in some of these companies, ranging from security to open source software. Moving into the cloud, you're going to learn more about the cloud. I'm glad to hear that it's real. I started in venture capital when there was something called time sharing, and the cloud is just the next generation of time sharing. We've just come all the way back around. One of our earliest successes was a company in Ann Arbor that generated NC tapes to drive numerically controlled machine tools via time sharing. It's a great business until people invented mini computers, and then people could do it in-house, and they didn't have to keep paying us for the service anymore. These things swing back and forth. So this is where the excitement is today. It's in software. Some of these companies can get started with no money from venture capitalists. Doesn't seem fair, but they can. And that's really good, actually, because they can come to us with a little bit of a track record, and they need a few $1 million to roll out their business. They don't need $50 million or $100 million like a semiconductor company. And many of these software companies are getting the job done. So that's why the average company today is consuming about $20 million in venture capital. I think I've gone beyond my time. And I didn't get interrupted for any questions. I'd love to have some questions if you've got any, either now or later. Yes, ma'am.
I'm actually asking a question from one of our chatters, from one of the businesses, and they asked,
think Kickstarter or similar angel funding methods are going to become the choice for young IT professionals looking to start companies?
I think that, as I said before, I think there are going to be a lot more companies started by angel money than by venture capital money. And some of my venture capital friends don't like that. I just wrote an article entitled Embracing Angels. I mean, angels are critical to this process. And I believe that what we venture capitalists should do is work with the angels. If they finance companies that are going to need more money than they want to put up, more than a few $100,000, then that's where we ought to step in. And I think, in fact, we're going to be announcing tomorrow a very well-known California angel is joining our firm. We plan to work very closely with angels. And I think most entrepreneurs would be wise to find angels, but be careful. With venture capitalists, you know what you got. You got a greedy investor who wants to make money. It's pretty simple. I mean, we're simple guys. We just want to make money. We don't have a son that we want to have join your company as your next CEO or your VP of sales. We don't want to go to the country club and talk about what you're doing and be proud of what you're doing. We don't have another company that we want to force you to do business with. So if you get angel money, make sure that their objectives are the same as the objectives of the company. And by the way, when you raise venture capital, make sure the same thing. If you plan to be private for the life of the company and turn it over to your kids to run, that's a wonderful thing to do. It's not something that would be financed by venture capital, though. So again, you go with venture capital, you're sort of committing yourself at some stage to a liquidity event. We ain't the answer for everyone. Hopefully for a few good projects, though. Other questions? Some later? Thank you very much.